So today's session, hydrogen is a solution to many of the big issues today, and green hydrogen can be used in industry, energy and transport to reduce greenhouse gases and air pollution. And Aberdeen is one of Europe's pioneering hydrogen cities. So we've got Angela Scott here today. Welcome, Angela. Angela became the Chief Executive at Aberdeen City Council in July 2014, so almost 7 years ago. She had joined the local authority the year before as Director of Corporate Governance, but she's worked in various senior roles across NHS side and as Head of the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. So Aberdeen City Council has done fantastic work under Angela's leadership. In fact, it became the first authority in Scotland to raise funds through the capital markets after issuing stock market bonds worth 370 million in 2016. So hopefully that's a reasonable introduction to the subject and to Angela, and I'm just going to hand over to you, Angela. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Good morning, colleagues, and please make sure that you ask me non-technical questions on a pretty technical subject. There's a number of slides. I wasn't going to religiously follow every slide, but please feel free to access the presentation. I wanted to just begin by a bit of context, and I guess it's the economic context of the city of Aberdeen and the northeast region. So I hope you don't mind me indulging me in a wee bit of history. You'll see why I want to share some of the history, because I think it should give us collectively a set of confidence in order to kind of take some of the direction which hopefully Aberdeen is taking. It's over half a century since the eureka moment of the discovery of oil in the North Sea, and well over 45 billion barrels of oil equivalent have been extracted since. The discovery of a vast reservoir of crude oil in 1970 in the Forties field signalled the start of Scotland and the UK becoming a significant oil producing nation. The Forties field was discovered by BP, which many of us may not be aware was a majority state-owned company until the government privatised it in a number of stages between 1979 and 1987. The Forties pipeline was opened in 1975. It's 235 miles of a pipeline system, which links 85 North Sea oil and gas fields to the UK mainland via Cruden Bay in Aberdeenshire, and then links into the Ineos site in Grangemouth. Both Grangemouth and the Forties pipeline were both owned and operated at a point by the nationalised British Petroleum Company. Again, reinforcing that point that all of this original early innovation was led by the state. If you can indulge me a wee bit more in the history, in the beginning of 1900s, the gas market in the UK was run by county councils and small private firms, and in 1948, Clement Attlee's government reshaped the gas industry via the Gas Act of 1948. Again, this nationalised the gas industry, and 162 privately owned and municipal gas companies were merged into 12 area gas boards. There were 12 across the United Kingdom and 1 for Scotland. In the beginning of the 1970s, the gas industry was restructured after the Gas Act of 1972. All the gas boards were merged into one. Again, another national state-owned company, British Gas Corporation, was created. The Conservative government introduced the Gas Act in 1986, which led to the privatisation of the company. British Gas PLC, as we now know it, was created. But as an energy supplier, British Gas does not own and maintain the pipe infrastructure which delivers gas to our homes. And we see exactly the same type of history for electricity. The Electricity Act of 1947 created the British Electricity Authority. It took over the operation of 600 small public supply power companies and also picked up the municipal authority electricity departments. So as I consider the policy drivers for Aberdeen and the North East, we clearly have a real clear economic driver for our city's transition. Our economy for over half a century has been based on fossil fuel, and the creation of a hydrogen economy for us is intended to act as a catalyst for the diversification of our oil and gas supply chain into renewables, thereby securing employment and training opportunities. And of course, like you, our second driver are all the statutory targets for achieving net zero from both the UK and the Scottish Government, which inevitably will only be achieved if we transition each and every one of our places. So as a city and as a city council, we've been exploring opportunities with hydrogen for some time, and I want to share some of that journey with you. Can I just move on a couple of slides to the one entitled The Next Phase of the Journey? So like you as a council, we've been wrestling with our institutional roadmap to net zero, as well as the even bigger challenge of a net zero route map for the administrative boundary of Aberdeen. And our route map for the place recognises that there will need to be change to the following areas: mobility, buildings, our energy system, our waste system, and our natural environment. And all of those dimensions will play a key part to achieving net zero by 2045. The commercial supply of hydrogen will support the council and the place of Aberdeen's requirement to decarbonise our heat, our transport, and our industrial applications. And you can see that in this slide, we've set out 3 phases to that journey. Phase 1 will provide a resilient, cost-effective supply of green hydrogen on a commercial basis to the market to support the existing and proposed transport projects. Phase 2 will see the expansion in the short to medium term to connect to larger volume utilisation of hydrogen, trains to trucks and marine. And phase 3 will see the whole system approach to the supply and demand, where we are genuinely becoming an exporter of hydrogen across the world. Phase 3 in particular is about supporting our economic objectives. So not only as a city and a region do we need to environmentally transition our place, but we also need to transition our economy. And phase 3 will be a critical part of that. If I could just move on to the next slide, please. So this slide sets out the journey that we've been on, and I guess like all of you, we've been utilising public bodies and our partners, and slowly been attempting to transition both our fleet and our vehicles. As you see from the journey, we culminate in where we are today in 2021, where we are about to go to the market seeking a commercial partner in order to develop a hydrogen hub. Hydrogen hub will be delivered in conjunction with a strategic joint venture partner who will hopefully bring ambition, expertise, investment and market knowledge to the joint venture, and will support the creation and implementation of a strategic roadmap to successful delivery of all of our 3 phases, which will become a contractual obligation for our joint venture partner. So we've been in this journey since 2014 with a number of stages and a number of key bits that we've played a part as a council in terms of the conversion of our the city's bus fleet, so 10 hydrogen buses way back in 2015, which then also required refueling stations, and again we aligned that refueling station to one of our own fleet depots as well, all the way up to the anaerobic digestive plant and hydrogen fueled that provides the heating, cooling and power system to the exhibition and conference arena, which again the council invested in, and Julie referenced the bond that allowed us to make that investment. And then here we are in 2021 seeking to go to the market. If I could just move on to the next slide. So I think that as always, the commercial attractiveness of any proposition comes from scale, and what we're attempting to do is to anchor the demand from a number of public partners who are equally committed to the transition of the city, both economically, environmentally, in order that we can create a sustainable demand. At some point in time, the consumer demand market will follow as households, private households, are required to transition their own private buildings, and as we're already seeing, gently a transition in terms of our vehicles. But what we're attempting to do is to use the public sector demand in order to guarantee that initial constancy of demand in order to support this to be an attractive commercial venture. The next slide shows and describes how we're going to continue to try and develop that commercial demand. And again, I think over history, what we consistently see is the state making initial investment to get to a point where the commercials make sense, and then the commercial sector come back in. But I do think there are some important lessons for us to learn from some of the history that I've shared with you, and I'll come back to that at the end of the presentation. So the intention is to try and just keep growing the demand that we can put into the hydrogen hub. Moving on to the next slide. So the history of the evolution of fossil-based energy systems is clearly and firmly rooted from my history lesson in national and local government. We had nationalised BP, we had national gas, we had national electricity companies. And before all of that scale of nationalisation, local government as municipals were front and centre of energy companies. So I think what ACC is attempting to do is to return to that position which we collectively as local government occupied in history as generators and providers of energy, which is critical if we are going to achieve our net zero ambitions. But we recognise there are risks, and we're attempting to manage the risks associated with this through a joint venture. This joint venture that we're seeking to develop adds to a series of existing partnerships which we already have. We have partnerships that are growing around energy from waste, or district heating, an anaerobic digestive plant. And I guess that as I reflect on history, and assuming that to some degree history will repeat itself, at some point all of these existing partnerships that we have developing, we expect to completely join up and become at some point in the future the integrated energy system, in the way that history shows us that from those initial small companies which municipal councils owned and were responsible for, how over time they were scaled up to get to the position of some of the national companies which were then duly privatised. So we do recognise that all of these interventions that we're doing at this point, at some point in the future, will have to be connected and make sure the flow of energy is even across the whole system. But it is important that we learn the lessons of history, and that must surely be to ensure that energy is both sustainable, that it's secure, and that it's affordable for everybody. And perhaps that's a lesson that we do need to learn from history. Just moving on. So in terms of lessons learned, I think the transition of our community to net zero will require partnerships. It will require political partnerships between 3 layers of government: the UK government, Scottish government, and local government. It will require partnerships between the public and private industry, given the scale of infrastructure investment required. So again, if you think back to the 1970s, 235 miles of pipe work was invested in order to support the transition of raw material. Look at the infrastructure of Grangemouth, for example. So there's a significant infrastructure investment that's going to be required. There's also going to be critical to our success as partnerships with the research and development community, and whether that's our colleagues in universities or in research agencies. Inevitably, the technologies are expensive at this point in time, and we do need the cost of those technologies driven down in order to make sure that the transition becomes more affordable than it currently is. And of course, we need a relationship between and a partnership between the public sector, citizens and businesses in order to support the transition which each will require to make. So as I talk to an audience of procurement specialists, it strikes me that you have a critical role to play in the roadmap to net zero, both in terms of how you lead your own systems in changing their energy commodity, and how we do that, of course, with Scotland Excel. But it also strikes me that you have a critical role to play in the transition to low carbon materials of every commodity that we purchase, and whether that's through our revenue budgets or our capital budgets. And I think, again, if I were sharing lessons learned with yourselves from Aberdeen, what I've certainly seen is a significant partnership that has developed between our head of procurement, Craig Innes, our Head of Economic Development, Richard Sweetnam, and our Head of Strategic Place Planning, Gail Beattie, who together are ensuring that the economic and the environmental transition that is required is joined up. And I think that the Hydrogen Hub, as part of that, both supporting the transition of our economy, and we hope to support private industry to make that transition, but it's also about how we're transitioning the energy system of the city. And as a city council, I guess playing our part in order to make that transition. So Julie, with that, I'm conscious that there is only half an hour. I didn't want to spend all of the time speaking. The slides are there. I didn't talk to every single one, but more than comfortable to take any questions or hear people's thoughts on the presentation.
Thanks very much, Angela. Really inspiring to hear about the work that you're doing at Aberdeen. You've got a couple of questions in the chat. I'll just kind of read them out to you if that's okay. Hang on. So we've got one here from Joel Evans, and it's got two parts. So I'll just ask you the first part just now. Would you hope to bring the manufacture of equipment related to the hydrogen economy to Scotland in the North East? And if so, how? Do you want to, yeah.
Yeah, so again, I'm not sure if colleagues are all aware of the discussions and the work that's underway within the Scottish Cities Alliance, which is the collaboration across 7 cities. And again, that we know that economically the 7 cities are generating a significant GVA, but from an inclusive growth perspective, it's important that all of Scotland gains from the economic opportunity that does come from energy transition. Selfishly for Aberdeen, given our half a century history of an economic dependence on fossil fuel, we face significant risk, and we've seen that already in terms of the number of PACE notices. We've got the highest level in Scotland, which is a product of the industry kind of transitioning. But like all chief execs of all places across Scotland, we will all want to capture those manufacturing opportunities. But I guess again, when I reflect on Aberdeen's history, you go back to the 1970s, that there was a whole army of people that were taking massive risks in terms of the building and the construction of all of those pipelines, the building of oil rigs and so on. Over the last few decades, Aberdeen as a place has kind of transitioned into being more of the research and development, and that's the city's USP now in terms of the technologies. So I think it's important that those manufacturing opportunities go to the right place and make sure that we spread that opportunity right across Scotland. We do have significant pockets of deprivation, so it is important that Scotland is thoughtful about where those opportunities go. Specifically in the context of Aberdeen, its core USP is around the research and development, but of course there are opportunities with the ScotWind leasing as well. And again, the city is in the unique position of it's going to have 2 harbours, one of the biggest deep sea harbours in Europe once the new harbour is built. So that, for me, that does represent opportunity for Scotland, not just the North East, in terms of what that can do. And I think that through the work of the Scottish Cities Alliance, what we're attempting to do is to make sure that we are not if we're being really candid about it, we mustn't compete with each other within Scotland. Scotland has to compete on a global stage. Yeah. So the more collaboration, I think, Julie, that makes sure that we're really thoughtful about how we disperse those jobs across. Because again, if I look at Aberdeen's history, whilst there's been significant good employment in history, the supply chain attached to oil and gas goes much further and beyond Aberdeen, and it has gone right across Scotland and into England. So we do know that that there's a core capability in Aberdeen around the research and development, but there's a clear capability and opportunity around the manufacture, and I'd hope that we would be able to join all of that up as a country.
Fantastic. And linked to that, how could the development of the hydrogen economy relate to the circular economy, which is quite a difficult question, but what are your thoughts on that, Angela?
I was saying to you as we were chatting, chief execs are masters of everything and experts in nothing, and I know colleagues will be chortling away at that. I mean, I think it is really challenging about how you integrate, and again, forgive the basics of of this, but it is absolutely critical about, you know, our waste will be our energy system. And so I think that, you know, in addition to obviously trying to reduce our plastic, but the opportunities that are presented through circular waste for that to become a much, much more significant part of our energy system. So I think that part of our discussion is to say that whilst we've got these 6 core areas where, you know, you need to be thoughtful about your waste and your energy system, your natural environment, your buildings, and your transport system. Ultimately, I think where we will go is how we integrate all of that, and so how you use and how you connect in a consistent and stable way the energy that you can then generate from your circular waste activity. And again, like many parts of Scotland, we have a waste and water sewers plant in the city. It's not a primary part of our energy system, but that's where we have to go. So in my mind, from a simplistic point of view, Julie, for me, it's about how we are going to join all of these aspects up. So the circular waste, the kind of core of the hydrogen, and how we will, a bit like going back to the history of how fossil fuel was built, how we're going to create an infrastructure that's going to allow all those different renewable sources of energy to come into a system that will then allow that to flow into all of our households. And again, you know, all of the infrastructure from the 40s pipeline was all designed to support the kind of flow of gases as well. So I think the trick is around multiple energy sources. And again, history would show that we may eventually narrow that down. But at this point in time, I think it's about testing different things in order to see what is sustainable and safe and affordable, and then how we will connect all of those innovations up to become then the new infrastructure that feeds all of our houses. And I think the significant challenge is not just about creating the supply, but making sure you've got a distribution system that can then flow all of that. And I do think the recent legislation from Scottish Government in terms of the Heat Act is incredibly helpful around saying, start identifying the zones in your area where what your dominant source of renewable energy is going to be. So as households start to transition and take responsibility for transitioning their own heating system, they'll then know what they're going to connect to. But, you know, I think that it's important that we reflect that, you know, we are where we're at from 1960, 1970. So this transition, you know, it's not going to happen overnight, but I think the fundamental is how we're going to connect. And the city's been, I think, you know, up to now has been trying to hedge around hydrogen and electric. And I think we're at the point where we're saying we're just going to keep trying to drive both of those agendas. And again, colleagues have been doing a pile of work around the electric vehicle infrastructure rollout. Again, we've been in some of that space, but we're now, through our partnership with BP and others, just talking about how we again scale that up to be a commercial opportunity. So there's a complexity to all of this, Julie, that goes way beyond my brain power, I have to say.
Actually, Angela, I'm just thinking that was a pretty comprehensive response to a technical question. So I think maybe you're hiding your light under a bushel when it comes to these technical questions. The next question actually relates to skills. And so 7 years investment obviously is very impressive. How have you developed the skills in your team to support these aims? And we're talking about commercial skills, private sector relationships, and so on.
I think it's I guess the challenge is that in the state as it's framed just now, you know, you could really be punished for innovating, can't you? Because there's so much, you know, I think we've all grown up about manage the risk. But I guess part of what we need to do is to innovate. And there is something pretty formidable and a lot to admire in that entrepreneurial spirit of, you know, those who went out into oil rigs in the North Sea in the 1970s before the health and safety. So I offer that by way of Aberdeen as a place is an innovative place, and it's had to be, and it's reinvented itself in oil and gas. And I think as a city council sitting in a city that has a very strong industry and a very strong expectation, rightly, from industry to us about what we will do. So a lot of our colleagues have an awful lot of an interface with industry. And I think that that, you know, again, when you look at the scale of risk that the industry is taking, I think that's kind of, you know, that's transferred to us. To be in this space again, I think you have to have political support and leadership and willing to kind of back. And again, I think again the history of the city council shows that all political groups have kind of supported that innovation from the council. And then I think obviously you've got to have good, you know, you've got to have good folk on your team, which is absolutely critical. And again, I think that we've been lucky in that we've attracted folk of that nature. But I think that, you know, again, the leadership of Craig as head of our procurement is very strong around commercialisation. So again, if I look at something like TECA, if I look at our Marshall Square, so we are lucky in the team that there is a kind of an entrepreneurial spirit in there that then gets the support of political leadership to take some of these risks. But there's a consideration and a thoughtfulness about, if we're moving into this space, how we manage that risk as well. But again, I think the reality is fiscally, but not just for us as institutions, but in economic terms for our places, this is the kind of space that we have to be in. And because we issued a bond, Julie, part of our credit assessment assesses not only us institutionally, but also assesses our economy. So we have now an inextricable incentive to make sure that we are driving the economy of Aberdeen through what we're doing. And if we don't do that, then we won't get our credit reassessment. So I think that journey has been important for colleagues understanding the necessity to join all of this up in a very, very deliberate way. And I think that's definitely helped. Sorry, that was a bit of a long-winded
No,
answer.
that's fine. The next question I think is quite technical, but you might not, because I'm not very knowledgeable about this. But I've got a question here from Scott Restrick. Looking at the scale of gas supply for public assets and key transport partners, what is the expected capacity of H2 storage locally within ACC, and what challenges exist to deploy such a safe storage facility? There are clear analogues here with the historical development of discrete town gas networks, which ultimately formed the National Methane Mains Network. Does that mean anything to you, Angela?
Scott, you've lost me. I was just at that. I'm so disappointed because I was reading a document this morning that had some of those numbers, but Julie, I haven't retained them. But I'm happy to kind of ping them onto you. But Scott, you've exposed the limitations of my. But colleagues do know the answer to that, and you're absolutely right about the safety of all of this. So I chair a multi-agency group which has our fire master on it, and we have been talking to Scottish Fire and Rescue endlessly about the transition to hydrogen, because absolutely from a safety point of view, and we were incredibly well supported by those same colleagues when we developed the anaerobic digester plant within TECA as well. So from that public safety point of view, we are absolutely linked into Scottish Fire and Rescue. But in terms of your capacity, you've chipped me up there. So I will definitely get that back to you, Scott.
Angela, you'll chuckle when you hear the comment that Stephen Brannigan's put in the chat, which is, can you detail the chemical reaction with hydrogen when reacting with oxygen to produce energy?
Julie, I'm going to stay true to myself as an accountant rather than as a chemist. So yeah, Steve's got me on that one too.
He did go on to say that he was only joking, and he's always impressed at the levels of knowledge of chief execs in Scotland. So there you go. And that's actually the end of our questions, Angela. So it remains for me to wholeheartedly thank you for taking the time to sort of be here with us today and to share your vision for Aberdeen City Council. Thank you so much. So we do have more sessions this afternoon. The next session for this work stream is driving quality and skills within the energy efficiency industry to help transition Scotland to net zero. And that will kick off about 1:30 this afternoon. And this afternoon will be chaired by Billy Murray from Scotland Excel. We hope to see you there, and please join us maybe 5 minutes before so that we can get you all in time. But thanks again, Angela. Found that really inspirational as always.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind of you. And Julie, I mean, it's a free offer to all. I mean, I'm saying this without having had Craig, Richard or Gail's permission, but I'm sure if any colleagues wanted to know more about the technical realities of this, I mean, please feel free to reach out. We're on a big learning journey and we'd gain as much from your insight into this as us sharing. So please reach into the team. I'm more than happy to share that. But thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Yeah, Angela, and before you go, you should have a look at all the really nice comments about your presentation, because people have really enjoyed it. So thanks again.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Angela.
You too. Bye.
Thanks then. Bye.